Hello, dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. The dinner table gleamed under the soft yellow light, but the warmth it cast could not melt the ice between them. Daniel sat at one end, his fork untouched, tracing the rim of his glass just to avoid the silence. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but no one seemed hungry. His mother, Margaret, shifted nervously, pretending to rearrange the napkins for the fifth time. Eric sat across from Daniel, shoulders stiff, jaw set tight. Their father, George, watched everything silently, his face unreadable, as if any word might break the fragile truce holding the room together. Daniel tried to sound casual, his voice cutting through the quiet like a dull knife. "Just tell me when the reunion is." He looked at Eric, half expecting a smile, half hoping for peace. But Eric didn't hesitate. His voice came sharp, bitter and cold. "You're not invited." The room froze. Margaret's fork stopped midair. George cleared his throat as if to speak, then thought better of it. Daniel's lips curved into a forced smile, but his eyes betrayed the hurt that spread across his face. He lowered his gaze to his plate, realizing that forgiveness wasn't waiting for him here. For a long time, no one said a word. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. The world continued, but in that room, time had stopped. Daniel finally muttered a quiet, "Excuse me," and pushed back his chair. As he stood, his mother reached for his hand, but he slipped away gently. He didn't look back when he walked toward the window, staring into the reflection of a man he barely recognized. 7 years earlier, things had been very different. Back then, Daniel and Eric weren't enemies. They were partners. Together they built a small construction company, working side by side, dreaming of success. The business started with sweat and ambition. Their hands built everything from the ground up. But one day, everything changed. It happened on a site just outside the city, a large building project that was supposed to define their future. A worker fell from scaffolding after a safety support gave way. The man died instantly. The investigation pointed toward design flaws and poor supervision. Eric said it was Daniel's negligence. Daniel swore it was the blueprint, one that Eric had approved himself. The brothers fought in front of everyone. Their anger tore through their partnership like a storm. Eric's voice thundered, "You ruined our name." Daniel shouted back, "You ruined my life." Their father, George, stepped in, not to calm, but to judge. He sided with Eric, claiming Daniel had always been careless, too emotional for business. The court case that followed drained their savings and destroyed their reputation. Daniel lost more than just his company. He lost his family. The townspeople whispered behind his back. Former clients turned away. He packed what little he had and disappeared, leaving nothing but a cloud of disappointment behind. Years passed before he heard from anyone again. The call came from his mother. Her voice trembled on the phone as she said, "Daniel, it's time to come home." She told him about the family reunion, how everyone would be there, cousins, uncles, old friends. It was their late grandfather's tradition, a celebration of togetherness. She said she wanted her son sitting at the same table again, just like before everything fell apart. Daniel hesitated for days before agreeing. He wanted to believe things could change, that the years had softened the edges of their pain. He imagined laughter returning to the table, imagined his father finally looking at him with pride again. But when he stepped into that house and heard his brother's words, "You're not invited," Daniel realized that the reunion his mother spoke of wasn't meant for him. He was still the outsider, still the man blamed for sins he didn't commit. He stood at the edge of the table, trying to hold himself together while the past replayed in his mind. The dinner plates, the strained smiles, the quiet disappointment, everything felt like a scene rehearsed too many times. The more he tried to speak, the more he felt like a ghost haunting his own family. That night, when the dishes were cleared and the lights dimmed, Daniel sat alone in his old room. The walls hadn't changed, the faded posters, the crack by the window, the faint smell of dust and time. He stared at the ceiling, remembering the boy he once was, the one who believed family meant forever. But forever had an expiration date, and his brother had just confirmed it with 6 simple words. "You're not invited." The kitchen light glowed softly against the dim silence of the house. Daniel leaned on the doorway, watching his mother's trembling hands rinse plates that were already clean.
She didn't look up when she spoke.
Her voice was a whisper, fragile as glass. He didn't mean that. Daniel exhaled slowly. He meant every word. His voice carried no anger, just exhaustion. Years of silence had hardened him, but her eyes, filled with guilt and love, pierced through the wall he'd built around himself. Margaret finally turned, her eyes glistening under the light. He's just protecting what's left. Daniel shook his head.
No, Mom.
He's protecting himself. She tried to reach for his arm, but he stepped back. The distance between them was more than physical. It was made of 7 years of lies and unfinished apologies. For a moment, the sound of running water filled the void, each drop echoing like a memory. Daniel's voice softened. Do you ever think about how it all started? Before the business? Before the fights? She smiled faintly, wiping her hands. You two were inseparable. You used to fix everything together, even broken toys. Her smile faded. Now I can't even get you to fix this. He looked away. The pain of being the forgotten child, the one everyone silently blamed, pressed heavy on his chest. For his mother, silence had become survival. For him, it had become suffocation. He stepped outside, needing air. The porch was cold, and the night smelled of old rain and cigarette smoke. His father sat on the wooden bench, the orange glow of his cigarette flaring with every breath. Daniel hesitated before sitting beside him. They stared into the dark yard, saying nothing for a long while. Dad, Daniel began quietly, you really think I shouldn't come to the reunion? George didn't look at him. He flicked ash onto the ground and said, reunions are for those who still belong. His tone was flat, but there was pain in it, the kind that comes from regret buried too deep. Daniel nodded slowly, biting the inside of his cheek. So that's how it is. His father's eyes stayed on the horizon. You left, Daniel. You didn't just walk away from the business. You walked away from all of us. Daniel turned toward him, eyes sharp. You made sure I had nowhere to stay. The silence that followed was thicker than smoke. The porch creaked as George shifted uncomfortably. He wanted to say more, maybe even something kind, but the words never came. When Daniel stood to leave, his father finally whispered, you were supposed to be the better one. Daniel froze for a second, unsure if it was an insult or a confession, then walked back into the house without replying. The next morning, he drove into town. The streets looked smaller than he remembered, the coffee shop with its faded awning, the corner store still run by the same man who used to greet him like family. But now, every glance he caught was laced with discomfort. People turned their heads as he passed. A woman he once helped move into her house crossed to the other side of the street. 2 old workers from the company looked away, as if he were invisible. He overheard snippets of conversation near the cafe. That's him, the one who took the money and ran. His stomach tightened. The rumor had taken root, twisted into something unrecognizable. In their eyes, he wasn't a victim, he was a thief. A coward. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. Someone had made sure this version of the story stuck. He needed to know who. His car tires crunched over gravel as he drove toward the old construction site. What once stood as their biggest project was now an empty field, overgrown with weeds. The metal fence was rusted, the sign half torn. Future Homes Project, Meek Brothers Construction. The words mocked him. He spotted a man unloading tools from a truck nearby, Leo, one of his old co-workers. Daniel called out his name. The man froze, then turned slowly. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by guilt. Dan, you shouldn't be here. I just want the truth, Daniel said firmly. Leo hesitated, looking around before lowering his voice. After the accident, everything changed. The company was about to go under. The police were investigating negligence, corporate charges, safety violations. Eric made a deal. Said he'd take care of it. Daniel frowned. Take care of it how? Leo swallowed hard. He put it all in your name. Said you'd already left town, so it was easier. The insurance claim went through under your signature. The money saved the company. Saved your father's reputation. But it killed yours. Daniel felt the ground tilt beneath him. His brother, his own blood, had sacrificed him to save their name. He walked back to his car like a man moving through water, his legs heavy, his mind spinning. When he sat behind the wheel, his hands trembled. He unlocked his phone and opened the voice recorder, his reflection faint in the dark screen. "All I ever did was try to make this family proud," he said softly. His voice cracked, the weight of years pressing down. "You turned me into your scapegoat." Tears slipped down his face unnoticed. In his mind, memories flickered. Eric laughing beside him as they painted their first office sign, the two of them joking about who'd be the boss. He remembered the late nights, the shared dreams, the promises they made as brothers. All of it felt like another lifetime. That night, Daniel returned home quietly. The porch light was still on. His mother sat waiting, an envelope clutched tightly in her hands. When she saw him, her eyes softened with the kind of sadness only mothers carry. "I thought you might go there," she said. Daniel didn't answer. He looked at the envelope. "What's that?" She held it out. "Something I should have given you years ago." Inside was a photograph, two young boys kneeling on the floor, building a tiny wooden house. Both were smiling, covered in dust, proud of their creation. On the back, in faded ink, their grandfather had written, "Brothers build together." Margaret's voice trembled. "I knew what Eric did. I begged him not to, but your father said we had to protect the family name. I thought time would make it right." Her eyes filled with tears. "It didn't." Daniel's throat tightened. "You knew, and you said nothing?" "I was trying to keep the family together," she whispered. He looked at the photo again, the two innocent faces staring back at him. "You can't keep a family together by breaking one of its pieces," he said quietly. She reached out, her hand trembling. "Don't lose the part of you that forgives, Daniel. If you do, he's taken everything from you." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The night air was cold, the world still. Daniel tucked the photo into his jacket pocket. Forgiveness felt impossible, but for the first time, he understood something deeper. The truth hadn't just broken him. It had broken all of them. The morning of the reunion arrived bright and deceptively cheerful. The house that had felt cold and heavy for days was now buzzing with activity. Laughter spilled from the open windows. Cousins carried dishes. Old relatives hugged. Children ran across the lawn. Balloons fluttered in the soft wind, and a long table was set under the oak tree where their grandfather used to tell stories. From the outside, it looked like a perfect celebration, a family united in love and memory. But Daniel wasn't there. He sat by the lake at the edge of town, far enough to hear the faint echoes of music, but close enough to imagine the faces behind the laughter. The water rippled gently before him, the surface calm and still, but beneath it swirled unseen currents, a mirror of his own heart. He skipped a stone across the water. It bounced twice before sinking, leaving behind small waves that vanished into silence. He remembered being here as a boy, racing Eric to see who could throw farther. Back then, the lake meant freedom. Now it was only reflection. His reflection. Calm on the surface, chaos beneath. He thought about what his mother said the night before. Don't lose the part of you that forgives. But how do you forgive someone who never even admits what they've done? The distant sound of a familiar voice broke through his thoughts. Figured I'd find you here. Daniel turned. Eric stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, wearing the same white shirt he'd worn to the reunion. He looked tired, though he tried to hide it. The two brothers stared at each other for a long time, the wind shifting between them like a silent referee. You shouldn't have come back, Eric said finally. Daniel's voice was calm, but his eyes burned. You shouldn't have lied. Eric scoffed, half in defense, half in shame. You think I had a choice? It was either you or all of us. The business, Dad's name, everything would have gone under. He said we couldn't survive another scandal. Daniel stood up, facing him squarely. So you chose survival over truth. Eric's jaw clenched. You don't understand what it was like, Dan. You disappeared. You didn't see Mom crying every night. You didn't see Dad losing everything he worked for. Someone had to take control. Someone did. Daniel shot back. You took control of my life. You turned me into the villain so you could play the hero. The words hit harder than either expected. Eric turned away, blinking fast, his composure breaking. You think it was easy? Watching Mom hate herself for letting you go. Watching Dad pretend nothing happened. Daniel took a step closer. Then why didn't you stop it? Eric's voice cracked. Because I was scared. He looked down, fists clenched. Scared of losing everything. Scared that maybe you were better than me, and I'd be the one left behind. The confession hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. Both men stood there, years of silence collapsing between them. Daniel's voice softened, trembling. I never wanted to compete with you, Eric. I just wanted to build something with you. Eric's eyes glistened. And I destroyed it. For the first time in years, they both cried. Not out of weakness, but exhaustion. The kind of crying that comes when anger finally burns itself out and leaves only truth behind. The lake reflected the scene like a quiet witness, two broken brothers facing each other not as enemies, but as fragments of the same story. Then another voice spoke, one neither had expected to hear. I thought I'd find you here, George said, stepping onto the shore. His voice was steady, but heavy with remorse. The brothers turned to see him standing just a few feet away, his usual sternness replaced with something they'd never seen before, vulnerability. He looked at both of them before speaking. I thought I was protecting this family, he said slowly. But all I did was break it. Eric's shoulders sagged. Daniel watched in silence. I made you choose, George continued, looking at Eric. And you did what I told you. That makes this my fault more than yours. He turned toward Daniel. I wanted to keep our name clean, but what good is a clean name when your family's covered in scars? Eric wiped his eyes, unable to meet Daniel's gaze. George stepped closer to him. Apologize to your brother, son. Eric opened his mouth but couldn't speak. The words trembled at his lips, trapped behind guilt. Daniel shook his head quietly. I don't need it. Eric finally looked up, confused. I don't need an apology, Daniel said, his voice steady but distant. Just stop pretending I don't exist. He turned toward the lake again, eyes on the reflection of all three of them, father, son, brother, standing together for the first time in years. For a brief moment, they almost looked whole. The wind rippled across the water, blurring their reflections, as if even the lake knew that wholeness was only temporary. Behind them, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifted faintly from the house. The reunion was in full swing, but the real reunion was happening here, in silence, on the edge of forgiveness. The days that followed were quiet, like the calm after a long storm. The air in the house felt lighter, though the wounds beneath it still ached. Daniel had packed his things, preparing to return to his small apartment in the city. He didn't plan to see Eric again. Their confrontation by the lake had ended not with closure, but with a kind of weary understanding, the kind that lingers between forgiveness and silence. 3 days after he left, an envelope arrived in his mailbox. There was no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable, Eric's. For a long moment, Daniel just stared at it, hesitant to open it, afraid it might pull him back into the pain he was trying to leave behind. Finally, he tore it open. Inside was a document stamped and signed. Transfer of ownership, Meek Brothers Construction. Eric had officially transferred his shares of the company to Daniel. No apology. No explanation. Just a short note clipped to the front. It's not forgiveness. It's acknowledgement. Daniel sat in silence, staring at the paper as if it were something fragile. For the first time in years, he smiled, not a wide, joyful smile, but a small, tired one. A smile of acceptance. He folded the paper neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and looked out the window. The sky was gray, but light was breaking through. For once, that felt enough. Months passed. The seasons shifted from autumn to a quiet, snow-touched winter. One morning, Daniel got a call that made his heart stop. His mother was gone. Peacefully, the nurse said. In her sleep. The funeral was small but filled with familiar faces. Old relatives, family, friends, even workers from the company came to pay their respects. The church was silent except for the soft sound of hymns echoing off the stained glass walls. At the front, Margaret's photo rested beside a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite. Daniel stood alone for a moment, staring at the photo, remembering her last words, "Don't lose the part of you that forgives." He wished she could see him now, see how far he'd come from the bitterness that once defined him. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed Eric walking toward him. Their father followed behind, slower, his cane tapping softly on the church floor. For the first time in years, the three of them stood side by side, not as a family broken by pride, but as people bound by loss. When the priest spoke, his voice was gentle and full of meaning. "Family," he said, "is not about blood. It's about the courage to come home." Daniel closed his eyes. Those words stayed with him long after the funeral ended. He realized that coming home wasn't about returning to a place. It was about facing the truth you'd run from, no matter how painful. After the ceremony, Daniel and Eric stood by their mother's grave in silence. The cold wind brushed against them, carrying with it the faint sound of the church bells. Eric spoke first. "She'd be happy we're both here." Daniel nodded.
Yeah.
Maybe she finally got her reunion. Eric smiled faintly, and for the first time, there was no tension in it. Just warmth, fragile, but real. A year later, the Meek family house looked different. The paint had faded, the garden was overgrown, but inside, the dining table was set again. Not for a crowd, not for a grand reunion, just for two. Daniel had cooked dinner himself. The smell of roasted herbs filled the air, reminding him of that first night back, the one that ended with silence and hurt. But tonight there was something new. Peace. He checked his watch. Eric was late, of course. He almost laughed at how predictable that was. But then he heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. Moments later, there was a knock on the door. When Daniel opened it, Eric stood there, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the same uncertain look he had worn the day they met at the lake. "I wasn't sure if I should come," Eric said quietly. Daniel stepped aside and smiled. "You're invited." For a second, neither moved. Then Eric nodded and walked in. They sat at the same table where everything had fallen apart years ago. 2 plates, 2 glasses, and the same wooden chairs that had once witnessed anger and silence, now holding something fragile, something healing. As they began to eat, the conversation was simple. Memories of their mother, small stories from childhood, quiet laughter that came more easily than expected. The shadows of the past still lingered, but they no longer ruled the room. If this moment were captured on film, the camera would slowly pull back, showing the brothers from a distance, 2 men sitting at the table where their story began. The circle, once shattered, wasn't perfect again, but it was whole in its own way. The light above them flickered softly, reflecting in their glasses. In the quiet between words, the only thing left was understanding. For the first time in years, the Meek brothers had finally found what they'd been searching for, not forgiveness, not redemption, but peace. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe our channel. Awesome visual story.